It's been a little over 2 months since I posted an anticipatory review of Life Incorporated. Having finished the book, I'd like to post a review. The general form of this review will be summary, criticism, and praise. I'm hoping that by sticking the criticism in the middle, you won't notice it as much. Life Inc. was written by Douglas Rushkoff, a media critic living in New York City, and his media-oriented perspective comes through the book in many places, as well as a bias towards New York City. The central thesis seems to be that corporations operate on a field that is heavily sloped toward them when acting by proxy, and that the only way to assert our human primacy over corporations is to act locally. The book begins with a personal story of Rushkoff being mugged, and the personal ramifications of that act. Then Rushkoff describes the circumstances that allowed corporations and centralized currency to rise, and intersperses that with some stories of people who attended seminars trying to get a piece of the corporate pie. Rushkoff then discusses how corporations have taken over many of the most intimate aspects of our lives. The middle of the book is a critique of the media which brought us to this point, which is interesting, but consists of a few morsels that sound a lot like what I've heard before. It probably is more rewarding to read if you've read some of Rushkoff's books on media. If you're interested in learning more about this, I recommend the video The Ad and the Ego. I do not recommend the company's other film, The Ad and the Id, since I doubt that subliminal advertising works in any real sense. Beginning around chapter 6, Rushkoff really starts to cover a lot of new ground. In page after page, Rushkoff pieces things together in a way that makes a lot of sense, but which you never would have thought of. Rushkoff places a lot of blame for corporate thinking on game theory. Rushkoff then describes how local currencies and alternative currencies work and finishes the book off with an account of how corporations have capitalized on social networking and co-opted some of the traditional social space, and how to reclaim that social space. The first and most significant criticism of the book is that the physical book is poorly constructed. The book felt too light, and a couple of the pages were overglued, causing me to tear a page when I tried to separate them. If you can get an ebook, or an audiobook version, or even a paperback, I'd recommend that. There's also a typo on page 209. The book has adequate notes, but more footnotes or endnotes would really be a benefit, especially if they were integrated into the text. The present notes all refer to a word or phrase on the page and become difficult to use as references. Furthermore, the notes often simply refer to notes in other texts. Dereferencing those notes would be helpful. Rushkoff approaches the topic from a subjective perspective, which makes sense given his human-sized analysis. While this is useful, there's a lot of space for Rushkoff or others to expand into an objective supplement to what Rushkoff has published. Rushkoff doesn't need to remove the anecdotes, but augmenting them with something verifiable would help. Rushkoff also has a critique of game theory that criticizes it for being based too much on competition. In reality, modern game theory tends to suggest that cooperation is a better strategy for winning such games as the iterated prisoner's dilemma. Some questions and suggestions that I have for Rushkoff. Rushkoff spends some time describing local currencies, which were based on a certain amount of crops stored in exchange for the currency. As the crops spoiled, your value would decrease, providing an incentive to use the money. I don't think we can have a local currency based on agriculture, based on the fact that so little of our economy comes from agriculture. That doesn't make this wrong, it just makes me wonder what we could use as a basis for such a currency. The other concern I have with local currency is distributed communities. While promoting localism is good, it seems like we should also be promoting tightly knit but geographically distributed communities, which can be difficult with currencies that are tied to one physical place. How can we overcome this issue? And as I mentioned before, I'd like to see more notes and a more rigorous objective analysis. So what's good about Life Inc? The best thing I can say is that it gets a lot right. It places a lot of things in a context that I never would have thought about before. Rushkoff suggests that corporations really began to flourish because they allow people to operate by proxy, and that humans should take advantage of our personal, intimate nature to achieve greater success than the corporate structure can. One of the most interesting examples of things I wasn't aware of is the practice of redlining. Redlining is the process by which housing developments were assessed by a number of metrics, including race mixing. I didn't think this sort of overt racism had been practiced by the federal government, but I was wrong. This explanation was part of a section describing how the suburbs were designed to promote consumption and prevent veterans from falling into the communist ideology that happened in Europe after World War I. This was done by making developments that featured small houses on large lots that were designed to be time sinks and removing traditional male social gathering places from those developments. Rushkoff cites crabgrass frontier extensively here, and I recommend finding a copy if you're interested in suburbanization. Rushkoff also spends a lot of time describing the design theories behind malls and shopping centers. This leads him to his media criticism, where he spends some pages describing get-rich schemes, The Secret, and Malcolm Gladwell's theories of understanding people at a superficial level. Unsurprisingly, he's not a supporter. I'll skip most of the media criticism for the reasons I mentioned before, and go on to the economic theories. Rushkoff does a good job of explaining the oxymoronic thinking, like attempts to harvest the next cool thing from society, believing that they're driving cool culture, when the actual effect is to extract vitality from the culture, leaving it barren, or the trend to encourage competition between employees in an inherently cooperative field. Rushkoff also talks about local action and organic action, which is a good direction to look. By refusing to act on a large scale, the scale of corporations, we can counter the corporations by doing what humans do best. Join a food co-op, for example, and grow your own food. It's a way to break out of the system where we subsidize one crop, inedible field corn, to the extent that it makes up 29% of all crops grown in the United States. All of this more or less leads up to the central thesis of the book. Rushkoff states that the Federal Reserve lends money into existence, though he never actually explains how this happens. The Treasury pays for the money it lends into existence by selling Treasury securities in the form of T-bills, which are intra-year loans, T-notes, which are intra-decade loans, and T-bonds, which are multi-decade loans. We purchase these loans by expecting more money in the future. The Federal Reserve pays us back with money loaned into existence, and which will itself have to be paid back. This turns out not to be such an issue, since we can, in theory, keep expanding due to new value entering the system through externalities like sunlight falling onto plants and helping them grow, or providing nutrients to animals. In practice, however, this doesn't work out, since we operate on a boom and bust cycle. In a bust, our ability to purchase these securities is limited, and we have trouble creating new money. Rushkoff's ultimate answer is to invest locally and to invest in others close to you. This seems like a good way to look at the issue. I hope this gave you some ideas, and that you'll be able to build on them so that we can go forward with a more rational economy.